what is the state of it? Is it as bad as these explanations and these reports make out?
It's much worse than you've just described with leaks and rodent infestations. That's the least of the problems. And the Times has a very interesting article, a very good comprehensive article about it this morning. An interesting historical point. There was a fire in 1834 which burnt the Palace of Westminster literally to the ground, apart from Westminster Hall. And you mentioned that I was Black Rod. It was in fact Black Rod, not himself, but his department, who caused the fire. They were burning tally sticks and they put too many in the ovens. And the ovens overheated, chimney overheated, the fire started, and the palace burnt down. Now, fast forward from 1834 to today, it's not just the leaky pipes, the sewage, the rat infestation. The problem is infinitely worse than that. One of the problems is asbestos. Huge amounts of asbestos have been used in the patching refurbishment of the Palace of Westminster over the last 70 or 80 years. And that means that every repair done in the Palace of Westminster has to have asbestos measures around it, which increases the cost of each repair by about fivefold. The second problem is that the loom of electrical wiring, IT cabling, and the whole infrastructure of the Palace of Westminster goes through these enormous ducts, which are the same ducts that take the Victorian steam heating pipes, which are still in use. Some of them never changed, and they could blow at a moment's notice, causing the infrastructure of the palace to completely break down. And that's just the start of it. Never mind the crumbling masonry and so on. So the problem is much worse. That's the start point.
Goodness me. I mean, it does beg the question, how did everybody let it get this bad? What you've just explained sounds dire and like there should have been intervention before this time.
The studies into what should be done have been really, really well conducted over the last dozen or more years. And since I was Black Rod, in fact, just as I arrived as Black Rod, there was a major study being undertaken into three things, really. What was the problem? How should it be solved? And when should it be solved? And there was a very comprehensive study run from in-house, from the parliamentary estate staff, brought people in to do this. In short, the summary said, the work needs to be done now. It needs a complete refurbishment of the Palace of Westminster. You can't simply patch up bits of it and hope that it will be all right. The most economic way to do it would be to do it now, to do it in a oneer and move everybody out to temporary location and get the job done. Parliament didn't like that, and I'll come back to the reasons why they didn't like that. Parliamentarians didn't like it. So because it came up with an answer they didn't like and debated it for some years, they then have formed twice external bodies, independent external bodies, to undertake a review. First of all, to redo all the work that was originally done, but to do it in more detail. And then secondly, to audit that work to see whether it was really right. And that's taken a period of nearly 10 years. Both of the studies, externally independent conducted studies, came up with exactly the same conclusions as the very first one. And the parliamentarians didn't like that either. And now, because of that, the parliamentarians decided to bring the work and the leadership of the work from external independent people back in-house. Now, there are two principal reasons why Parliament hasn't done anything about it. The first reason, and the biggest reason, and it's a very understandable political reason, is the sheer cost. It could cost anything, and nobody knows, like all building works, when you can't get at some of the problems, nobody knows what the final cost will be, but it could be between 9 and 20 billion pounds, and it could take for as long as some people say 15 to 20 years to do all the work. And for parliamentarians, that is not only an eye-watering sum of money, but to spend that could be perceived by the public, almost certainly will be perceived and criticised by the public as parliamentarians spending vast sums of taxpayers' money feathering their own palace bed.
So I'm so sorry to interrupt. This is extraordinary story in many ways. Just before we let you go, is it likely that everyone will have to move out, or does it carries on until someone does something about it? Very briefly.
All the studies say that the best way to do it is to move everybody out.
Okay.
A lot of parliamentarians simply refuse, saying that they're in Parliament maybe for one session, one 5-year session, and they want to have their time sitting on the green benches somewhere in the Palace of Westminster, and they don't want to move out.
So
And that's the second political problem, a selfish individual one by some MPs.